It's been my pleasure to work with the Institute for Electronic Arts in tandem, bringing this artist here today and allowing this to happen. I want to give a very special shout out to Miles Calvert, who is the director of the IEA and was super instrumental in bringing this person here today. I also want to thank the Shine Joseph Endowment and the National Endowment for the Arts for sponsoring today's guest. Today's guest is Claudia O'Steen, who comes to us from North Carolina, where she is an assistant professor of fine arts at Winthrop University. She received a BFA from Watkins College of Art and an MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design in Digital+Media. She's exhibited both nationally and internationally at venues such as the Russian State Arctic and Antarctic Museum, Maajaam Estonia, apexart, Flux Factory, Ohio State University, Manifest Creative Research Gallery, and the Atlanta Contemporary, amongst others, and has been awarded residencies across the globe at Rabbit Island, Hambidge Center, Montalvo, the Arctic Circle, the National Center for Contemporary Art in St. Petersburg, Russia. O'Steen's work points to a never-ending process, a series of attempts to measure an infinite line, to chart the color of the sky, to capture the single point where a shift occurs in a limitless expanse. She uses sculpture as a tool for observation and perception by creating instruments and devices that capture and translate transitional moments, returning information distorted, amplified, and transformed. Using these devices, she attempts to orient herself by examining place via the lens of personal experience and primary observation, often selecting points that are ultimately impossible to calibrate against. Failure, error, and disorientation are all important means to understanding her circuitous process of discovery. So yes, one of the reasons that I'm so excited to bring this person to speak to you guys today is because, as you can see, the work is so rooted in this idea of research. So yeah, I think without further ado, please join me in welcoming Claudia O'Steen.
Good morning, everyone. So I first want to say thank you to Alfred for inviting me here, to the IEA, and Miles Calvert for inviting me to participate in this residency. I'm super excited to be here. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I am an associate professor of fine arts at Winthrop University in South Carolina. It's located right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, where I teach interdisciplinary art and oversee the expanded media department. In my work, I combine a wide range of media, such as performance, sculpture, video, drawing, writing. My work is super research-based, and I do a lot of field work, and I often collaborate across disciplines. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about collaboration in addition to research. I have a collaborative practice with Ali O'Gazian in addition to an independent practice. So today I'm going to talk to you about a few different projects. I'll talk to you about some of my personal projects and then a collaborative project as well. And rather than just showing you the end product or the work in a gallery space, I'm going to kind of talk you through my research process, fieldwork process. I think that's probably more useful and more interesting for you. So both of the images that you see here are part of collaborative projects with Ali. The top image is me in the Arctic. This was at the Arctic Circle residency, using a sextant to understand my location in relation to a glacier. The bottom image is a collaboration with NASA's Airborne Science Program in Mountain View, California. So in my work, I develop systems, processes, and tools to try to understand something, and then I'll repeat that process over and over, and then examine the failures, the abnormalities, or anomalies in that process. A lot of my work is somehow about the idea of failure, and I often attempt things that I know are impossible. For example, like trying to follow in the footsteps of a failed Arctic explorer, or trying to collect tidal measurements using an obsolete system of measure. And a lot of my work looks at moments where technology fails to capture something in the world around us. So I do mostly installation work. Through my installation, I attempt to understand something through many different perspectives. I often create tools or devices in my work. So this particular piece, I was looking at tools used for communication, specifically tools used to communicate at a distance. This sculpture was based on a heliograph, which is the image on the right. A heliograph is a wireless telegraph that signals flashes of sunlight using a system of mirrors, like using Morse code. And so I made my own version of this. And I developed these tools to try to understand my environment. This particular work was about the failure at communication. So in this video, my version of the heliograph has a glass lens. It has a mini projector built into it. And the projection is sometimes reflected onto the screen behind it. Sometimes it catches the light, but it always feels elusive. So you understand that there's some sort of communication happening, but you can't quite translate it or make it out. And when I begin a project, I usually never know what I'm going to create. So I never go into a project thinking, I'm going to use these materials. This is what it's going to look like when I finish. I usually start with the location. My work is centers a lot around the environment and landscape, or a tool or process that I'm interested in. And then I start a research process, and I start collecting and documenting. My work is usually site specific, and I document in a lot of different ways. So in this particular work, I was interested in a beach in Rhode Island. I visited the same site every day for 3 weeks to conduct a wide range of field work and documentation. And again, at this point, I didn't know what I was doing, so I just documented in as many ways as possible. So that would be a good way for you to approach projects when you don't know what you want to create. Just do everything that you can think of. You're going to toss most of it probably, but it's going to lead to exciting discoveries. And those failures, the things that don't work out, often become really exciting things. So with this project, I said I went there every day for 3 weeks. I took Polaroids every day. I collected a rock. I collected a water sample every day. I took underwater video. I documented the place, the time, the temperature, the sunset, and then observed things like the number of steps it took me to reach the edge of the water. So with each project, I think about what types of documentation might be relevant to the research I'm doing or the site where I'm working. I often create my own tools to document a place. So with this project, I was interested in surveying equipment. So I developed my own version of a split image transit. And I started thinking about how can I document things that are impossible? How could I survey the apex of a wave, for example? So I took this surveying equipment and started holding it in front of the water at the horizon line every day. So this is like part of a large format print documenting that. I also used color cards to try to match the color of the sky every day. And I also do a lot of stream of consciousness writing in my work to try to understand why I'm interested in something and to try to make connections between things. So with this project, I had an hour drive to this site every day, and I would talk to myself in the car on that drive and record it and then transcribe it when I got home. And it really helped me to make connections. And actually, I realized that the drive, the point of like the process of being in between these two places was more important than being at the place itself. And it was through that writing and talking that I made that discovery. And then, so this actually became part of an artist book. So the transcription was paired next to an image from a cloud atlas that matched what the sky looked like on that day. This is part of that project as well. This project is called Arc of Visibility, and this is the split image transit. Can you see my mouth? No. The wooden thing in the front is the split image transit that I mentioned. So something that I often do in my work is develop a tool to do field work on site. So I made this thing without the tripod on it. So it had a strap on it so I could carry it around my neck. I built it so that I could attach a camera to it. And I'll show you what that footage looks like in a second. And then for the gallery space, I take the same fieldwork tools and sort of transform them so that I can show you what my fieldwork process is like. So the structure in the foreground is my bespoke split image transit. The other two structures are versions of binocular stands that house projectors. Each stand is made of yellow heart and cedar. I wanted to use one very soft wood and one very hard wood. I also used rocks that I collected on site and a glass lens as a counterweight on the stands. And I made a ruler out of a warped piece of yellow heart. I used this ruler to take measurements while at the ocean and then again in the gallery space. I made sandbags to hold things down, filled them with sand collected on site, and then painted color cards and placed them around the gallery space so the viewer could go through my same process of trying to match the color of the sky. And so this is a video of what the inside of that split image transit looks like. So I would hang it around my neck, walk around and try to line up the horizon. And the process of using it was very disorienting and required me to continually attempt to line things up. Again, an impossible task when both me and my background are in motion. I think this moves on to a shot of the gallery. Yeah, so you can see, you can look through the split image transit and kind of have that same view. This binocular stand projects that video onto the floor that you just saw. So this is a project called Leveling Network. This body of work focused around a tide gauge in Kronstadt, Russia. I completed a residency at the Russian National Center for Contemporary Art in St. Petersburg, and I became really interested in this specific site. So this yellow building, the site in Kronstadt, is the zero level of the Baltic system of depths and heights. Analog tide measurements began here in the 1700s by order of Peter the Great, and this was done as a protection against flooding from the Gulf of Finland. And these measurements continued throughout time and are still completed today. Analog and digital measurements are still completed. So Kronstadt is actually one of the largest archives of tidal data in the world. And just to give you a sense of where it is, the red dot is Kronstadt. So it was about an hour away from St. Petersburg. Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, called Kronstadt the hub of the universe because all depths and altitudes in the Baltics, even the heights of spacecrafts, are measured from the sea level measurements taken from this exact spot. The island wasn't open to the public, even to Russians, until several years after the fall of the Soviet Union. So the research process was for this project was really complicated and full of holes. So before I start a project, I'll do a ton of research before I start working on site. And because this was a residency, I had like close to a year to do a lot of research about this site. And for this project, it was super difficult. And actually, some surrounding Baltic countries are in the process of transitioning from the system, meaning that there will be about a 10-inch increase in absolute heights. So on my first trip to Russia, I developed my own process for collecting tide measurements, knowing that it would be susceptible to human error and other environmental factors. So this is a video that explores that process. I created my own devices for this, and then I also did drawings to document the conditions that existed there that day. And something else that I was interested in was this blue bridge next to the station, because different types of surveys have been carried out here for a long time, even before the tide gauge structure was built. So it's like pretty rudimentary analog thing. I would just like drop this over the ledge, and it was just a rope with knots in it that I would use to measure People thought I was crazy. So as you can imagine, there is a lot of inconsistency in this process. So these are the drawings that I mentioned that I did. So I did these measurements several times a day, and then I did these drawings based upon the data. So it would document the tidal levels that I collected that day, but also how many things like how many people walked by, the weather. And I made my own sort of code to document this. I was really inspired by Brian Eno's graphic scores. If you're not familiar with Brian Eno, he's musician, ambient sound artist, also a painter. But he makes these really beautiful graphic scores for his music. So I was inspired by that. And then to display them, I made a version of the thing on the left is a version of an old analog Mariograph. So I used that to display some of the drawings. Another component of this project was the city's naval cathedral.
We set up the sea level gauge and lowered the window buoy.
And I could see this through my bedroom window. So I have a problem with direction. I like get disoriented everywhere I go. So this really became a beacon for me in my work. I used it to navigate everywhere I was. I used it to survey and map the city. And I also found that in the past, the Russian military also used the dome to survey and map the city, which I thought was really interesting. So because I was always using it to like locate myself, I could even see it from the airplane when I was leaving. I would like go out on a boat to survey something, and I would use it to understand my my location. So it just sort of made sense that this would become part of the project. So I started using it as an icon or a measuring device or marker in my installation. And so doing any in-depth research on Kronstadt or the tide gauge was really difficult because so few people on the island spoke any English at all. And there isn't very much literature about the tide gauge that's been translated. So before leaving for Kronstadt, I tried to understand the city through like one novel that I found that took place there. So I used text from that book in combination with excerpts from my own journals in this video.
Я со восторгом смотрела, как могучая цитадель формировалась под тяжелым навесом облаков, которые висели на восточном небосклоне. И вся эта сила и угрюмое великолепие были раскрыты мне.
And I worked with an exchange student at Winthrop
I just went back to
University
the tide gauge, but still.
for the translation. So the image on the left is an instrument that I made that's a cross between a slide rule and a tidal staff that uses the Naval Cathedral Dome as the slide. And it's paired with the drawings that document the daily data as a way of communicating the measurements and surveys that were being taken of the coastline, the water level, and the city itself. So the viewer can also use the slide rule to measure or understand themselves in relation to the tide measurements that I was taking, just as I was always trying to understand myself in relation to the cathedral dome and the measurements. And as I mentioned earlier, in my work, I often use sculpture as a tool for observation and measuring and create my own devices to interrogate the landscape. So a year after the first visit, I went back for a second time. The first time I went in winter, the second time in summer. And this time I brought objects and instruments that I devised after my first trip and then used them on site. So I created my own logo, a surveyor benchmark, a surveyor flag, and this became a performative process. I also became really interested in the way that the city uses the tide gauge, their daily collection of analog and digital measurements, and what role this analog ritual plays in the community. And because the tide gauge has some of the oldest collections of measurements in the world, I started to wonder how this could be potentially used to look at sea level rise and changing coastlines. I started talking with researchers at the Moscow State Oceanographic Institute to understand what role, if any, the tide gauge plays in their research. And I found that because of the way information was handled during the Soviet era through perestroika and into Russia at that time, there are like a ton of gaps in that information. So it essentially, again, back to this idea of failure, it wasn't super useful in understanding how things have changed over time. And the bridge at the site of the tide gauge, the one you can see in the background here, is called the Blue Bridge, and it's an important part of Kronstadt's history. It's often referred to in association with the tide gauge, and it's used for giving directions to the site. I learned through research the color was relevant or important to the history of the bridge, but I could never get anyone to explain to me why it was important, and I still don't know. But that mystery became really interesting to me. And so I wanted my search or process to try to understand the relevance of this bridge and its name and color to be evident in the work. So the true color of the bridge, as it looked to me while I was there, appears in several different places in the installation. And then I also took samples of the Blue Bridge from all like photographs, video stills, from each day of the performance of collecting tidal measurements so that you could understand the color in the bridge itself and how it's changing, just as my understanding of it changed over time. And this is just an image to show you the entire time that I was there, both trips, I was trying to find the person that would come collect the analog measurements, like on a beautiful piece of paper. My last day there, I was getting ready to leave and saw them walking away with it. And we couldn't communicate. So I never could talk to them or understand what I was looking at or where they were going with it. But I just thought that was kind of a perfect ending to the trip. Seeing this person walk away with the thing that I was trying to understand 2 years in a row. So after conducting all of the field work, all of the research, I try to understand how the objects can be used in the gallery space, but still refer to their previous life. So like the structures before, I kind of reworked them so that they could show my process. So this is the thing that I use to take the tidal measurements, but there's a projector house built onto it. This is the video of the cathedral dome. So through this work, I looked at Kronstadt's failure and my own failure to collect accurate measurements. It looks at where the gaps exist in data and how those might manifest in my own work. So failure at communication, at measuring, at determining how a landscape is changing, and failure of technology. This project, Keweenaw Observing Station, is a collaborative project with Ali Ogasian. This work was developed over 2 summers when we were invited to participate in Rabbit Island residency, which is a month-long residency on an island in Lake Superior. So we lived there alone summer of 2021 and 2022. We were lucky to be able to do this 2 years in a row. This project has taken on many different forms, so I'm going to kind of walk you through the evolution of it. This is the first iteration. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about the residency. Rabbit Island is 91 acres of undivided forested land in Lake Superior. So essentially once you're accepted, you go up to the Keweenaw, they drop you off on a boat on the island. You take about 2 weeks worth of food with you, which they restock halfway through. It's essentially like camping. There's no electricity. You're there by yourself on this island. So in the early phases of our research, we were very interested in Lake Superior for many reasons. It's the location of the mid-continent rift, which I'll talk more about in a second. It's the largest freshwater lake in the world, containing 10% of all the freshwater on Earth's surface. It has a surface area close to 32,000 square miles, is 350 miles long, 160 miles wide, and its deepest point is about 1,300 feet. So it's so massive that it creates its own weather patterns. And that's something that we were super interested in. And we were interested in trying to find ways to document these weather patterns. So just a little more about the residency. There are really no enclosed spaces. You do have a wood-fired sauna. So you're bathing in the lake, which was around 40 degrees when we were there, freezing. So we would jump in the lake, then run to the sauna to warm off, but that's your only enclosed structure there. But the really interesting thing about it is you begin to live in a different way because you're enmeshed in that environment so deeply. So we quickly began to feel that we were sort of one with that island. You start to live by the changes in the light, the changes in the weather. And we really hadn't anticipated the psychological effects that this would have on us. Because while we had done a lot of field work before, we had never been this immersed in our chosen landscape. We knew that we would be conducting a lot of field work while on site, so we did a lot of preliminary research. We were both very interested in field work because it allows you to connect with the place in unexpected ways. And I think when you become like fully enmeshed in an environment, you start to see things differently. In Marcia Bjornared's book, Turning to Stone, she describes fieldwork in this way. The experience of being fully immersed and dwarfed by the object of one's study leads to a shift in consciousness, akin perhaps to what writer and philosopher Iris Murdoch called unselfing, in which the fat, relentless ego is finally subdued. To Murdoch, unselfing was essential to becoming a moral being. The stern logic of the landscape necessarily redirects one's thoughts outward. And so, as I mentioned, we were really interested in the fact that Lake Superior is the site of a failed rift. The Keweenaw Peninsula is located on the mid-continent rift system, and Lake Superior covers a large basin that was created by the rift. If the Earth's crust had continued to stretch, then this would have become an ocean. So obviously drastically altering the geography of North America. Evidence of this failed rift is present in the rocks in the Keweenaw, so we were excited to find ways to search for and document this evidence. So we were really excited by this idea that Lake Superior is forever in the process of almost becoming something else. We had a lot of conversations with researchers working on projects surrounding Lake Superior. So that's another piece of advice for students. If you're interested in something, reach out to people who are studying the same thing. Like, look outside of the field of art for inspiration for your work and reach out to those people because they're often very excited to talk to you about what they're working on. When we arrived in the UP, we reached out to Nancy Langston, who wrote Sustaining Lake Superior. She actually invited us to go on a hike with her while she talked about some of the ideas that she wrote about in the book, talking about the ways in which Lake Superior and the ecosystems there are being impacted by climate change. We talked a lot with Dr. Jay Austin, who's a professor of physics and astronomy at the University of Minnesota, and he's also a member of the Large Lakes Observatory. So we were trying to understand the methods he was using for his research and his methods for collecting data. Like, this is just a little image of like his system of underwater recorders. And so we became inspired by his process for collecting information. We also had a lot of conversations with geologist Bill Rose, who's based in the Keweenaw. And this is where we really started to think about the rocks in the Keweenaw differently. We started to understand them as living things with the lichen on them, keeping them in a constant state of flux. All of these researchers are looking at how climate change affects things like movement of invasive species, water temperatures, weather patterns, and lake levels, and they're all using a lot of different methods to try to understand this. And so I'm very interested in collaboration in my work, not only with my artistic collaborator, but also ways in which collaboration is used in fieldwork in general, and just the unexpected things that can result from collaboration. The really interesting methods of collecting data that can result. So just to give you an example, Dr. Austin was studying winter ice coverage on the lake, and he ended up working with a researcher who was looking at the movements of the snowy owl in the UP. So they used GPS on the owls to see where they landed on the lake to understand how the ice coverage was changing over the period of that winter. I also do absurd things. It's not always super, like I consider this research also play. So just absurd things like trying to understand the island while I'm away from it, trying to make relationships, to create relationships to the island in my everyday life. So when we arrived to Rabbit Island, the project began as a site-specific installation and performance. And I think it's important to note you don't have access to a lot of materials there. You're limited to the things that you can fit in your backpack or on the boat that takes you over there. There's some hand tools on the island. We were also trying to work in a way that didn't disrupt the ecology there. So our plan was to build this weather station on this rock to sort of exist as an analog for the entire island. So we would install and deinstall this every day, and it really changed how we lived because we would have to plan our days around this sort of machine that we created. So, and the weather can change quickly. It can be quite intimidating at times on the island, and because you have no enclosed structures, you have to understand how to live in response to that. So we had to listen to the marine forecast every few hours to be able to plan for how we would deal with this installation. So this is just a video of us installing it. So we made these analog tools, really simple tools to measure wind and weather patterns as well as water depth. And we noticed that there would sometimes be pretty drastic shifts in nearshore water depths. And then we looked into this. We've learned about lake seiches, which are created by strong winds and rapid changes in atmospheric pressure that pushes the water back and forth. So it's essentially like plopping into a bathtub. The water moves like that. So we created this system. The sticks that are painted gray and white were used to measure water depth. The yellow and gray sticks are collecting other wind and water data. And they're just precariously positioned in the rocks, in the shoreline, measuring these conditions on a micro scale. The work uses wind, light, color, and waves to visualize patterns that might otherwise be ephemeral or imperceptible. So it kind of serves as poetic annotations to the daily NOAA weather reports. Our experience the second summer changed our perception of weather patterns on Lake Superior because it was so drastically different than the prior summer. And so we were unable to predict anything about future weather patterns. So in contrast to the first year where it was unseasonably warm and pretty calm, the second summer we were in a constant state of flux. It was like extremely windy, it rained almost the entire time. And so our days were really structured around these changes in the weather. which obviously really affected us physically and emotionally. So thinking about the seiches, we developed analog drawing machines to document the pattern of the waves. We had a system of string with knots to measure the water levels. So we did at least 20 of these drawings a day. So we were constantly tending to this giant machine. We also kept detailed logbooks about our personal experience and the things we observed. We collected underwater photo and video. And after leaving, we just had an abundance of material, and we started to look at all of the data we collected to try to figure out how that we could, like, ways that we could reveal the ideas that we were interested in. One of them being understanding this place through repetition. So we've shown the work in a variety of ways. I actually installed a version of this exhibition last week, and so that's what I'm about to show you. So after you have all this documentation, you have to figure out how to combine it in a way that makes sense to explain the ideas that you're interested in, right? So I just started with things that I was interested in. We first made a video that shows the colors of the sky and water each day with an audio piece overlaid that has description, like I read our written description of the colors. We also took 3D scans of the rock that we were working on, and I like to draw, so that was just like naturally one of the things that I did when we got back. I started drawing these like really strange looking parts of 3D models. And then we created this video, which sort of gives an overview of the project. The title Trophic State Index is a scale that measures the productivity of a body of water, and it's used to assess the quality of lakes, ponds, and reservoirs. So I think this is where the data sort of begins to coalesce. It shows our fieldwork process. It reveals the many processes we use to collect data and shows different ways in which the data is translated. So all of this data resulted in an exhibition that's been shown twice now. This is the first iteration, and it changes each time it's shown in response to the gallery space. It's a large-scale installation, the culmination of 2 years of fieldwork and data that we collected on the island. It combines our research with countless hours of studio and material experimentation, and really explores the interplay of water, weather, and geology. The title of it is Limnologies, which refers to our varied and extensive attempts to observe and understand weather patterns occurring on the lake, ranging from systematic to absurd to poetic, as well as the psychological impacts of this. The installation reveals our obsessively collected data through sculptures that function as observational mechanisms. So the individual sculptures look at different elements of the field work. The wooden sculpture, so we kind of created a system for this. The wooden sculptures use lumber that we used on the island with the painted gray and yellow color system. And the wooden structures are used to kind of give an overview of the project and data. It contains video, casts taken on site, found marine foam, CNC milled topographies, laser etched wind and water drawings. It contains video showing footage captured by a wildlife camera, a sketchbook with color swatches matching the landscape, and underwater footage. And when looking at the sculptures, you naturally examine the information and the objects on them, but then you begin to consider their relationships to the objects and images around them. So you can see wind and water drawings are translated through many different media here, through metal plasma cuts, through laser etchings, and through shadow, light and shadow. So each sort of constellation of work explores some category of the data collected. These use metal gridded towers to explore water, wind, ground, sky, and color. We 3D scanned and photographed the entire rock that we worked on the island and recreated parts of the surface through large format prints placed on the floor with projected images and sound. This section of the installation looks at the rock itself and the data collected on, around, and below it. So it contains found objects, casts made out of a variety of materials, 3D scans, images of 3D models, laser etched data, screen prints, UV prints, video, and light and shadow. And so in the installation, shadows begin to reveal things that aren't immediately visible in the sculptures themselves. And the video interacts with the shadows and objects in unexpected ways. So in this section of the gallery, you can see the sun sort of moving from one object to another. Everything in the space appears to interact with each other. And because of this, you end up using one thing to understand its relationship to another thing in the physical space and in the environment being studied. So when you move around the space, you also personally become part of the work. So you're naturally going to interfere with the light and the projection. So you see yourself present in this landscape. So you start to think about yourself in relation to the people around you, to your immediate environment, and to this environment that we're exploring. So to give you a specific example, this video projected onto the objects in the background examines the sky, but when you look at this mirror, you see a reflection of water. So you start to think about the relationship between the two. It also contains laser etched writing from our journals, giving you another lens through which to examine this. So we included a lot of our writing in the space. And just another image here. This is a video projection of a wildlife camera. And so while you watch this, you also see the videos playing in the background, and you naturally begin to compare one thing to another. We documented the horizon every day, made strips revealing in the changes in water and sky color. This sculpture looks at the sky as cinema, is captured through a second wildlife camera. And I'm just going to quickly tell you about what I'm working on here, which it's very much in the works. So I've only got a couple slides for you, but I'm working on a project now called In Extremis. It's a multimedia artwork that examines the effects of climate change and human impact on the South Carolina coastline and the ways in which the eroding salt marshes impact the surrounding landscape to create ghost forests. As marshes erode, salt water encroaches on the maritime forest, slowly killing the living trees and turning them into decaying lumber. This work is a search for transitional landscapes and methods to quantify them. So essentially, I kind of described what a ghost forest is, but to put it more simply, the salt water is taking over the forest that's right by the ocean. And so there are these trees that are just disappearing into the ocean. So you see all of these like dead trees sticking out of the ocean. It's really a surreal landscape. So in this video, I combine images, archival images of this place with my current documentation of the place. And something else that's really interesting about it is that there were a lot of like cabins built along the coastline, which have completely fallen into the ocean. Many of them were torn down, but you can still see the pipes and a lot of the plumbing left over from these houses. It's like sticking out of the ocean. So you see all these like crazy dead trees. And And I'm just really interested in like the rapid changes that are happening there. And so that's what I'm working on here. At some point towards the end of the week, I'm going to open up my studio to the public. If y'all want to come check out, I'm doing a little mini installation. I don't know the date and time yet because everything's like super in flux right now. But if you want to follow my social media, I'll post on there at some point and tell you like when and where if you want to come check it out. Thank you.